Okay, James, the room's yours.
Okay. Good evening from Japan. Good morning in Germany. I'm going to give a brief introduction to Judith. So, Judith Buendgens-Kosten is a postdoctoral researcher at Goethe University, Frankfurt. Is that still correct?
Yes, yes.
Excellent. So my data is up to is most recent. Okay, so they hold an MA in online and distance education from the Open University UK and a doctorate degree in English linguistics from the RWTH Aachen University in Germany. Their research interests encompass multilingual computer-assisted language learning and inclusive education in the EFL classroom. I've known Judith for approximately a decade through their seminal work in various journals and edited volumes. Their paper on game and language teaching was a stake in the ground regarding the connection between pedagogy and games-based learning, looking at games through behaviorist, connectivist, and community of practice lenses. This was back in 2012. Judith has also published on the topics of authenticity in call, the monolingual problem of computer-assisted language learning, more recently, multilingual interactive fan fiction, and breakout rooms. It is my great honor to welcome Judith Tujaut-Cole to the virtual stage to talk about learning while playing and gaming and teaching while playing and gaming. And I'll let Judith pronounce them in German. Judith, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, James, for the kind introduction. And I'm going to talk about Spielend Lernen, Spielend Lehren, or in other words, how games and play can influence our learning and teaching, referring to learning English as a foreign language, but also referring to teacher education. So first, a little bit context. Where am I joining you from? I'm currently at Frankfurt, which is a large city dating back to the Middle Ages in the state of Hesse in Germany. Sometimes people nickname us Manhattan because we have a lovely skyline, and the river you see on the picture is called the Main or Main. We are well known for two things, and one is the airport, which some of you will like, some of you won't like if you ever traveled in Europe. And the other thing is we're known for apple wine. And actually the culture surrounding apple wine is one of the UNESCO listed intangible world heritages. So if you ever end up in Frankfurt, have a glass of apple wine and enjoy our culture. Why am I telling you this? Not only to advertise the local products, but also to give you a little bit of context where I am speaking from. Because I work in teacher education, actually knowing where I am doing teacher education will help you understand the context in which I'm working. Because of course, teacher education is a very state-specific thing. Secondly, you will notice in my talk that I have an extremely European-centric perspective on things that is also influenced by me working at Frankfurt University in Germany. All right, so what can you expect? I have planned 4 major topics. First, I would like to talk about games from a plurilingual perspective. That is how we can use games in the languages classroom to foster not only vocabulary in one language or syntax in one language or pragmatics in one language, but plurilingual competencies. Then I will move on to talk about specifically identity, multilingual identity and games. Then I will switch the focus. The first 2 blocks are about teaching languages to language learners. The second 2 blocks will be about teacher education. I will talk about some of the specific challenges involved in preparing future teachers to use games and play in their language classrooms. And I will introduce you to the didactic biplane and what it can tell you and how it can help you in preparing teachers for game-based language teaching. All right, let's start with the very first block, Spielend Lernen, learning through games and play. When you think about how you would imagine a learner to look like or learning to look like, maybe in your brain, something forms that is not that far removed from this picture. What you're seeing here is an illustration in Comenius's genius book, Orbis Sensualium Pictus, the first language teaching book that worked with illustrations rather than just with the text. And this was basically how people looked at a school in the 17th century. So maybe you have an idea of learning that is not that far removed from how people saw learning 400 years ago. Very few of you will have a visual ideal that looks more like this. Two children very much engaged in play. Or a picture like this, a group of adults engaging in gaming. And this is not because games are not an important topic in our discipline. In Gillespie's 2020 overview over articles published in Recall, Call, and Calico over 11 years, he found 26 articles on games published in these journals. And this, of course, is only a small slice of all the research going on games in language learning, because, of course, we also have system, we have Judith Call, we have language learning and technology, we have ludic language pedagogy, and we have a myriad of edited volumes that also contribute to our knowledge base on games in Call. What is not so well represented is the focus I want to talk about, and that is an explicitly plurilingual perspective on games in language learning and teaching. And for that, let's move on to Eurydice. And by Eurydice, today, I do not mean the wife of Orpheus, but the report series published by the European Commission that looks, among other things, at languages taught in Europe. You don't have to look at this map in very much detail, but if a country is painted blue, it means that at least in some educational pathways, more than one foreign language is taught. And if you look at the diagram on the right side, you will see that anything from 2 languages, 3 languages, or 4 languages are taught by default in these countries. So you would have English and French, or English and German and Chinese, or English and French and Spanish and Dutch being taught in one of these educational pathways. And if you consider this reality of the educational systems in Europe right now, then it becomes a little bit silly to talk about English as if English was the goal of English language teaching. Because once you hit the goal, the game is over. No, it's much more sensible to imagine English, which tends to be the first foreign language being taught, as a gateway. It has meaning in itself, but in addition to having meaning in itself, it is a pathway that also leads to additional language learning in the future. So when you are learning English, you are also studying how to study languages. You're also developing positive attitudes to studying languages. And you develop a broader range of linguistic resources that can help you in additional language learning. What is the goal then? The goal then could be seen as plurilingual competencies, the development of your full linguistic repertoire, not only in one language. I think many of you will be acquainted with the Common European Framework of Reference, which is extremely helpful for assessing language competencies. But few people actually enjoy reading the introductory bits of the Common European Framework of Reference, and I'm citing from those. The CEFR is based on a plurilingual approach, which emphasizes the fact that as an individual person's experience of language in its cultural context expands, he or she or they do not keep these languages and cultures in strictly separated mental compartments, but rather build up a communicative competence to which all knowledge and experience of language contributes, and in which languages interrelate and interact. From this perspective, the aim of language education is profoundly modified. It is no longer seen as simply to achieve mastery of 1 or 2 or even 3 languages, each taken in isolation with the ideal native speaker as the ultimate model. Instead, the aim is to develop a linguistic repertoire in which all linguistic abilities have a place. And when you look at the original CEFR document, this sounds a little bit academic at times, even though it obviously underlies the whole philosophy of the Common European Framework. But if you now look at Council of Europe 2018, which is called the companion volume, they actually added descriptors for very specific plurilingual competencies. So just like we have descriptors for reading or descriptors for dialogic speaking that you can use to actually scale competencies, we also now have descriptors for plurilingual comprehension. That is the ability to draw on your whole repertoire in reading a text or reading multilingual texts. And we have building on plurilingual repertoire, that is speaking or writing, drawing on more than one language, either as your background knowledge or actually producing multilingual statements in conversations or in texts. So if you take this serious, multilingualism or plurilingual competencies are one of the main goals of language teaching. But we shouldn't only talk about goals. Adelheid Hu has coined a very important phrase. She states that multilingualism should always be seen as a prerequisite and a goal. Yes, the end game is plurilingual repertoire, but students do not enter the classroom as a blank slate. They already bring a lot of linguistic expertise and a lot of linguistic resources into the classroom. Maybe they are bilingual, maybe they are bidialectal, speaking the standard language and a dialectal variant of the language. Or they have a lot of odds and ends of resources from traveling, for example. So another perspective on multilingualism is not just how we achieve plurilingual competencies, but also how we can use existing resources as a means, as a support for target language teaching. All right, that's all nice and well, but how about call and game-based language learning and game-based language teaching? I did look at 4 of the bigger call journals at Calico, Call, LL&T, and Recall for a period of 10 years and try to find articles that in their titles referenced any kind of multilingual, plurilingual, translanguaging, any of these key terms. And I could find only 8. And out of these 8, some of them do not actually, they aren't actually about multilingualism. They might, for example, describe a telecollaboration project in which at some point a bilingual text was created, but the bilingual text and its creation is actually not at all part of the article. It's just a little bit background information that is not being discussed. And from this, I concluded that call as a discipline has a monolingual bias, understood here as a deficit in considering the full range of pre-existing languages of a learner, of languages used in a setting, or of plurilingual skills in the design of and the research on computer-assisted language learning. And I would like to bring forward the argument that this monolingual bias can lead to a monolingual problem. A lack of knowledge about how call products and projects can support learners in using all their linguistic resources to achieve language learning and language using related goals, and a lack of call products and projects that realize this potential or that support specific plurilingual skill development. And of course, when I'm saying there's a problem, I can start thinking about what could we do to alleviate that problem. Daniela Elsner and I tried to coin the idea of M-call, multilingual call, understood as the study and practice of language learning, digital media in non-monolingual contexts or settings, or using non-monolingual media. Basically saying it's important that occasionally we look explicitly at multilingual or plurilingual components when we are talking about call, just to make sure we're not developing a monolingual problem that stops us from seeing all there is to see, understanding everything there is to be understood, and designing products that actually help students learn and develop their competencies. So, is there an M-call approach to game-based language teaching or learning? I would like to present to you two projects that I have been engaged in that try to chip away just a little bit at this monolingual bias, and that both involved game-based learning, game-based teaching. And these are the Melange and You Do It projects. Melange and You Do It were both funded by the European Union. They were multi-year international projects involving partner universities and partner schools across Europe. And what we developed are one thing that I would very, very happily call a serious game, and one product where I'm not quite so certain whether maybe a gamified platform or a game-like platform or a game-inspired platform might not describe it a little bit better, but I'm going to call it a game, at least for today. In both of these games, you as a player or your high school student as a player takes up a role, a player character. And in Melange, you take over the role of Mali. Mali is a young man from Oxford who speaks English and Urdu at home and was taught at school with 2 foreign languages. He learned a little bit of German and a little bit of French, but not really a lot. Let's say A1 level, but that is taking it very kindly. And as Mali, you delve into a world that is characterized by multilingualism. Mali travels from city to city to city. He is in Oxford, Frankfurt, he is in Barcelona, he's in Tallinn, he's in Luxembourg, he's in Istanbul, and I probably forgot a city or two. And during his travels, he always has something he has to do in each of these cities. He has to find an old friend and persuade them to rejoin his old band and participate in a band contest. But of course, in all of these cities, different languages are spoken. Yes, English as a lingua franca is spoken by many people, but he also encounters the whole range of other languages that is typical of Europe. So in Germany, he of course encounters German accented English. He also encounters German, and not only the standard language, but also different dialectal variations of German. And he encounters all the other languages that are typically spoken in a business-oriented city like Frankfurt. And when he goes to Barcelona, there won't just be English and Spanish and Catalan, but also those languages that are typical, for example, of the migrant population of Barcelona. So we call this English Plus because you as a player can use a lot of English, but English not in a fictional monolingual world, but English as it is actually spoken in a heterogeneous, multilingual context of major European cities. You do it, it's a little bit different in its design. There is not one main character, but you have a choice. You can either play Amal, who is a native speaker of French and Amharic and learned Arabic. You have Maureen, who speaks English and Hausa, and you can be Rami, who speaks Arabic. And then you choose one target language you want to focus on, which could be English or German or Luxembourgish or Catalan or any other of a whole range of languages. And when you're then playing, you do it, you will encounter the target language in many different varieties. And you can also use your L1s in some situations. For example, when you're interacting with bilingual interlocutors. So again, you do it is informed by actual multilingual practices that people encounter in their daily lives. How do these games look like? Because I know these are just 2 screenshots from the starting page. This is now a screenshot from the You Do It game. And what you see here is that you as a player can click on objects or on non-player characters. What you see here are 2 non-player characters. And when you do so, a dialogue tree opens. One of the key things you're doing in this game or gamified platform or playful whatever is that you talk to people. And you do that not by typing or just by speaking aloud, but by selecting from a range of pre-scripted options. And then depending on how you choose your statements, the non-player character will respond differently, maybe with confusion, maybe with trying to help you, or maybe with understanding and nodding and giving you the information that you were seeking out. In Mélange, the basic gameplay is very similar, but one of the key features is that you can choose between different languages depending on the situation. Here you see Marley, who is at a food stand in a city close to Barcelona, and he wants to talk to Anthony Martinez. But Anthony doesn't speak English. And now Marley, or better, the player, has to decide how to respond. You're in a small town close to Barcelona. Do you say in Spanish, I don't speak Spanish? Or do you try to say, what do you mean? In the little bit of Catalan you picked up while you were waiting for your plane to board. So he doesn't speak Spanish and he doesn't speak Catalan, but he has these few odds and ends that you pick up from the tourism information. And it does make a difference in a bilingual setting, whether you try a little bit of Spanish, try a little bit of Catalan, or say, okay, sorry, I don't speak neither of them. I have to respond in English. And the other characters will react to you differently based on what you're doing. So if you're in Luxembourg at the traffic information, and you use just a little bit of French, just a word or 2, they will be much more friendly to you than if you just waltz in and start in English directly. Nobody expects you to have the whole conversation in French, but just a little bit of bonjour and merci will, you know, make the part a little bit easier for you. And how does this connect to plurilingual competencies? The first one is English in these games is a lingua franca. We're not presenting a kind of native speaker model that you will not actually encounter all the time while traveling in Europe. Yes, Marley is a native speaker of English and he has a British accent, but all the other speakers of English in this game have German accents, Spanish accents, Estonian accents, and that is totally fine. So you meet a lot of different language models. You experience multilingualism and the actual linguistic diversity in Europe. It reflects how languages are actually used. And in each city, they are used differently. So you encounter the whole variety and heterogeneity of European cities. Most importantly, I think, is that these games model successful plurilingual communication. You will find people whose English skills are not that great, but who get the meaning across and are actually funny, charismatic people who have a lovely conversation, even if their language level is not at a B1 or B2 level. Likewise, you have people who are better communicators by engaging in code switching, by drawing on intercomprehension, and by supporting others using mediation. So you have a lot of role models and positive characters that show how plurilingual competencies help you to get along when traveling in Europe. And if you would like to take a trip to Frankfurt, at least virtually, I would like to invite you to try playing Melange. Especially, you can also play You Do It, but in Melange, you can go to Frankfurt and see some of the lovely things that you would see when traveling here in person as well. And if you would like to learn more about the design and theory behind this, this is an article I would like to recommend. All right, let's go to the second out of 4 big units of content today: identity and play. I probably do not need to define identity, but just to revise, I use Norton's definition here. Identity is the way a person understands his or her or their relationship to the world, how that relationship is constructed across time and space, and how the person understands possibilities for the future. As such, identity is multifaceted, changeable, and actively co-created. And I said before that identity is often used as a concept in CALL, and that has a lot of good reasons. Many of those are utilitarian. When you say that supporting identity can lead to higher investment or higher motivation. And then the idea is that if your learners are more invested into learning the target language, if they are more motivated, then they will have better outcomes. I agree with that, but I would add to that there are also ethical reasons. Creating a setting for learning in which students feel seen and accepted contributes not only to language learning, but also to the well-being of the individual students. Equally, language learning material that actively contributes to marginalization and other exclusionary processes has negative effects beyond the realm of language learning and teaching. So taking identity into account is helpful for language teaching, but might also just be the right thing to do. 2 years ago, I looked through recent issues of CALL journals, and I did find that there's a lot of publications on identity in CALL, Calico, language learning and technology, a little bit less in Recall, plus a bunch of special issues on identity. But when I looked at those, they nearly exclusively look at computer-mediated communication. And they don't just look at the whole range of computer-mediated communication, because in games, you can also have CMC, but they explicitly looked at the kind of CMC that is not part of computer games. So basically, while identity is well researched in CALL, there is not much attention to identity as it relates to games, at least in these journals. We all know a lot of things is also happening in edited volumes. This one came out, I think, 2 days ago. I couldn't yet read it because it's stuck in customs clearance. So there's a lot of paperwork to be done because it was shipped outside the European Union before I can actually read that book. But there's at least one article in this book that looks at identity specifically relating to games. When you talk about identity, I'm now making the connection back to multilingualism. We often talk about Dernier's L2 motivational self system that was originally based on Higgins's model of the ideal self. Henry, 5 years ago, extended this model by Dernier, developing a multilingual motivational self-system that doesn't just look at one target language, but looks at identity and target languages in connection. Henry argues, for people learning 2 or more additional languages, processes of emergence produce multilingual self-guides. These self-guides can be conceptualized as constituents of a higher level multilingual motivational self-system. For people who develop an ideal multilingual self, motivation to learn the LY can be greatly enhanced in that developing target language competence becomes part of a larger identity project. However, at the same time, it is also clear that the image of an ideal multilingual self is likely to lack detail and elaboration. Now, we do know that teaching interventions can impact the multilingual self and attitudes to multilingualism. We know this for primary school, for secondary school, and in the context of teacher education. And these are only some of the papers that looked at this. But my question now is, can digital games help learners in developing a detailed and elaborate ideal multilingual self? And I would argue that the kind of thing we're doing in Melange and You Do It, that we are modeling plurilingual practices and show a wide range of different successful communicators, might be helpful in building this detailed, elaborate, positive ideal of a multilingual speaker. But I think we can go further than that. Barab et al. Argued that video games can be used to position person, content, and context in transformative ways. This sort of consequential engagement is very difficult to accomplish in schools and in non-interactive media. Teachers can describe a situation, share a book, or even show a movie, but doing so does not create a setting that learners can act upon and change in personally valued and socially significant ways. And they introduced the notion of transformational play to describe how games specifically can be massively impactful for identity. Such play involves taking on the role of a protagonist who must employ conceptual understandings to transform a problem-based fictional context and transform the player as well. And I would argue that this doesn't only work if you are considering conceptual understandings like science knowledge, but that this also works when you apply this to language learning contexts. They also argue, in a game, failure is tolerated and risk-taking is encouraged. Players can experiment with conceptual understandings and learn from the impact of unproductive choices. And again, I do believe that this is a beautiful way to look at the use of different languages or different variants of one language in a digital game. You can try to get along in English only at Luxembourg, and maybe people are friendly to you, or maybe they aren't, but it's just a game. So you can learn from your choices and try again and see if different utterances and different languages and different levels of politeness yield different results for you. Some of you might have heard about the Fantails project. The Fantails project looked at transformative digital storytelling for learning languages and was like just like You Do It and Melange, a European Union financed international cooperation project. One of the core things of Fantails was working with multilingual storytelling, with fan fiction, with telecollaboration, and with interactive fiction. And those of you who came here from the workshop by James Morris will know what I'm talking about, because we actually used Twine for interactive fiction. If you didn't attend that workshop, interactive fiction is a type of story in which the reader can interact, often by making choices. That is typically non-linear, so it's a branching story, and is told mainly through text, though you can have images, you can have sound, you even can have video. And right now, at exactly this moment, we do have a research project running that looks at whether secondary school students engaging in multilingual storytelling using interactive fiction based on the books they're reading in the EFL classroom anyway can impact multilingual identity and can support students in developing plurilingual competencies. We're doing a pre-test, post-test format with a delayed treatment control group, but it's still ongoing. I would have loved to bring you data, but I literally don't have any data yet. In a couple of weeks, I'll have that data, but I couldn't include it today. So hopefully, in a couple of weeks or month, we'll have a better understanding of whether the transformational play that is supported by designing your own multilingual interactive fiction and by playing the multilingual interactive fiction designed by others can impact your multilingual self-system. All right, we did have Spielend Lernen, and now we're moving to Spielend Lehren. And I would like to talk about games and play in teacher education. And I'm certain many of you work in teacher education and have integrated games and play in that, because you might want to support teachers in becoming effective users of game and play in the languages classroom. And at least from a German perspective, there are two major challenges involved. And maybe in the discussion, you can share your experiences, whether you see the same challenges or if these things are absolutely no problems in your contexts. One of them is habitus, and the other thing is apprenticeship of observation. Habitus, of course, has been coined by Bourdieu, but I'm referring here specifically to the media habitus, which is defined by Kommer and Biermann as a system of permanent media-related dispositions that serve as foundations for the creation and the ordering of media-related practices and for media practices-related beliefs and attributions, and which are developed during, and I'm summarizing a lot, socialization. So it's important to look, they would argue, at the kind of media habitus pre-service teachers have when they enter university education to prepare them to become teachers. And Kommer looked in 2004 at 28 pre-service teachers at a pedagogical university and conducted interviews and video recorded students working on a media product that reflected their media biography. And he found that the absolute majority of students participating were characterized by high cultural capital and experiences of restricted media use, of a socialization regarding media that distinguished between good and bad media, and basically put books on a pedestal, saying books and quality of content, they reign supreme, and a lot of other things should ideally be avoided. On the other hand, the category competent with affinity for media, which were young people in teacher education who actually enjoyed playing digital games and reported high levels of media literacy. These were tiny little numbers. So the majority of teachers in teacher education did have a perspective on media that was not positive regarding digital games, and often was also characterized by, not being allowed to play games, games being judged negatively, etc. Now you can say the data collection was in 2004, the paper published in 2010, it's 2022. Apply. Well, Basler found in 2021 slightly different results, but Blume in 2019 reporting on a study of 150 EFL pre-service teacher students at one university found that 70% of pre-service EFL teachers never, rarely, or only occasionally played digital games. And there was no distinction based on gender. So students of all genders were rather unlikely to consider playing games as a hobby. And now you could say, well, what gives? I mean, they don't like playing, it's fine. But she also observed that those students who actually played games had a more positive attitudes to digital game-based language learning. So positive experiences with games translated into more openness to using them in their own EFL teaching in school contexts. Now, I know the plural of anecdote isn't anecdata, but maybe you had experiences just like mine. When I'm in a seminar I'm teaching on computer-assisted language learning, and we have our session on games, and I start to explain, okay, there are different kinds of games. There are massive multiplayer open online games, there are serious games, and then I give examples for the different kinds of games. I do see a lot of blank faces. And I know sometimes my examples, they're a little bit old-fashioned because I'm not really up to date, but I do have students who report never playing any games. And I mean, not even casual games, not even Tetris, not even Candy Crush, not playing games at all. And they, of course, find it very challenging to understand the theory inputs. If they now read a research article on language learning and World of Warcraft, do they actually understand that text? It will be very challenging for them. So that is a disadvantage for these students, at least. The second concept I would like to introduce that is a challenge for teacher education related to games is the so-called Apprenticeship of Observation. Before a young adult, or also, students can be of all ages, before somebody joins the teacher education program at university, they have spent more than a decade as a pupil who was observing a teacher, evaluating their teaching, and developing a whole bunch of preconceptions. So basically, before they even take the first step onto university campus, they have a decade worth of watching their teachers teach. And this is super important when you look at these numbers also by Blume 2019, that say that 81% of pre-service EFL teacher students in her sample never or rarely played English computer games in the EFL classroom during all of their schooling. 63% of her 150 students never, ever, even for a single time, experienced game-based language teaching in their school career. And what is even worse, it's really adding insult to injury. Those that had some experiences with their teachers using digital games or digital media in the EFL classroom tended to have a more negative attitude towards digital game-based language teaching. So most didn't have any exposure, and those who had exposure just learned that digital games and media in the EFL classroom are a really bad idea. That is rather depressing. So what does this mean for teacher education, especially regarding preparing teachers to utilize games in the EFL classroom? I'm sharing now some things from my own practice, framing them theoretically, and I will very much like to hear your own experience of teacher education shared in the discussion session or maybe during social events later today or tomorrow. So one concept that is really the foundation for my own practice is what you see here. It's called the pädagogischer Doppeldecker, which translates as pedagogic biplane. When we're talking about teacher education, we are saying didactic biplane because, of course, we do not teach children, we teach adults. Now, the German word is didaktischer Doppeldecker, and I wish I could translate it as didactic double-decker because it sounds so much nicer than didactic biplane. But unfortunately, the metaphor doesn't work if you have a double-decker bus. So even though didactic double-decker sounds so much nicer, I am forced to say didactic biplane, and I'm so saddened by that fact. Okay, so what is this didactic biplane? It is a method of teaching used in teacher education, where you combine the kind of teaching that allows the university students to experience a method as learner, while also reflecting on that method as a future teacher. So rather than just teaching the method in the abstract, you use the method in your teaching as a university educator. And then after students have experienced the method, they reflect on the method, having these two layers. And Baal argues, academic training is not just in harmony with the pedagogic biplane, but urgently needs it as a holistic model and in order to raise to awareness the subjective theories held, which were of course developed during the Apprenticeship of Observation. Without it, the pedagogic biplane without the pedagogic biplane, academic training is cognitively enriching, but generally not fertile for sustainable changes in didactic methodical action. Very, very simply speaking, because students watch teaching for so many years, just learning about a method does not mean they will implement the method in their own teaching. But by experiencing this method as learners and reflecting about it as teachers, as future teachers, they are much more likely to adopt this for their own teaching practice. And this means basically that I am forced to do really silly things in my teaching. One of the first things I did when I was fairly new at Frankfurt University and students still didn't know me was that I went to a seminar on digital storytelling and I was really being mean. I said hello, but I didn't even smile. I introduced myself, 2 sentences, not a smile. I showed no interest in my students at all. And then I handed out a syllabus. And oh, what a syllabus it was. It was a nightmare. 3 times the workload, no exceptions, no flexibility at all. You know, be late once and you fail the class. It was a nightmare. And then a fellow teacher stormed my classroom and she was dressed as a fairy. I'm not kidding you. She came in a full-blown fairy costume. And she told me that I had been cursed and she was now using her magic confetti to cure me of that curse. She actually literally threw confetti at me, which I cleaned up afterwards because I did not leave a messy classroom, and then left. And I, astounded, had to admit that something might have gone wrong here and passed around a trash can in order for everybody to trash the wrong syllabus while I handed them the correct syllabus. Now, this is not a game. This was playful, but I think it reflects the basic idea. I wanted students in the seminar to really understand what a storytelling prompt can be and how it can feel like. And if I describe what you could do to make an interesting, engaging storytelling prompt, that would not have worked. It would not have countered their apprenticeship of observation. I actually needed to make them experience a storytelling prompt and act on the storytelling prompt in a way that they could then, in the didactic biplane, reflect as learners and teachers. And there are a myriad ways in which you can integrate playful things into seminars, even if they are not focused on games and gamification. I mean, in my breakout game and gamification seminar, yes, we can have a full session that is full-blown gamified. We do not have a seminar session. No, we have job interviews for Men in Black. And I'm in costume. I greet students as people who have applied for a secret agency dealing with aliens. And we're not working, we're not revising. We are actually doing an assessment center, and it's fully gamified. Just then, to have something we can reflect upon using again the didactic biplane. But a lot of smaller scale things can be integrated in all kinds of subjects. You want students to work on a difficult topic and discuss this. Well, I always get a phone call from the UN Secretary General on those days, who is calling me in the middle of my lesson to share with me an important problem. And then my students have to fix it so we can call back 45 minutes later with the solution to the big scale problem that we have been discussing. Or if you do some kind of revision activity, revision game, maybe as a breakout game, why not tell a story about this? Why saying, okay, we're doing a revision game? Why not say, oh, I've prepared all this revision material, but then I was hacked. And now we have to find the traces of the hacker and find all the codes so you can access the revision material. If you integrate this in different seminars with a game-based language learning focus and even without a game-based language learning focus, and then always combine it with reflection, you're creating much more openness to actually using game-based language teaching, or even just silly, playful, ludic, gameful elements in the EFL classroom later on. And something similar applies to, of course, using commercial off-the-shelf and serious games. When you have students who have never played these games, they will struggle a lot to understand how they work. So in a session on game-based language learning, I make students play serious games like the Coming Out Simulator. So we have actually an example that we can discuss together. I think tomorrow, Elizabeth Lavalette is going to talk about how one can use games to teach learning theories. And I saw actually she has a lot of the same ideas that I have. Why not let students play Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes in order to understand interactionism? It's not that you need to use this game for students to understand it, but it's a good illustration, and it means that even if their own bourgeois habitus makes it very hard for them to relate to academic learning related to games because they have so limited experience, they are now building these shared experiences that they can later on use to understand game-based language teaching much better. One more thing that we do a lot, and that will not probably be a new idea, is micro-teachings. There's one project called DigiTeam, which is a sub-project of DigiGap, in which pre-service teachers experience CALL, and also as part of CALL, game-based language learning in the role of teachers and learners in simulated partial lessons, classic micro-teachings. Some students prepare a mini lesson and the other students participate as learners. And what we do is we combine this by letting students cooperate with students in the general education seminars so they can share what they are learning. And at the same time, their micro-teachings are being recorded and analyzed by the students in education seminars. And we do have cooperations between pre-service and in-service teachers, so that the in-service teachers can get practical ideas from the pre-service teachers that are kind of state of the art, while the pre-service teachers can learn about the needs of the actual classroom, the needs of daily teaching, and also have a place where they can try out their material. And we're doing a lot of data collection regarding this project. But again, I don't have anything to report yet. We're still in the thick of it and cannot really tell you any findings. So I started my talk with a little bit of a word play, because I said, Spielend Lernen, that is learning while playing, learning while gaming. Spielend Lehren is teaching while playing, teaching while gaming. And I lied a little bit, because Spielend Lernen has two meanings. And the second meaning is doing something with great ease or without effort. So Spielend Lernen could also mean learning without actually having to work for it. And I have to admit, I would love it if that was the case. But while I hope I could show that you can develop plurilingual competencies while playing and while gaming, and that you can use playing and gaming beautifully in teacher education, I am not claiming that it's with great ease or without effort, because learners will always have to tackle hard ideas, engage with difficult content, whether it is presented playfully or not, the effort is the same. And with that, I would be very happy about questions.
All right, Louise really did put the Dracula.
I really put it on.
Judith, thank you so much for the talk. You covered a lot of ground, and I'm sure that there's a lot of questions from the audience. You probably know that I have lots of questions, but hey, I'll keep quiet for a change. And I invite the audience to. We have about 15 minutes, so if you'd like to ask Judith anything about their expertise in this particular area, maybe it be call, maybe it be games, maybe it be in multilingual education, identity, raise your hand.
Or just share cool ideas of what you're doing.
Cool ideas of what you're doing, yeah.
Classrooms.
Come on, don't be shy. It's not like you guys. We have a question, I believe.
Yes.
Can we see the references slide again to screenshot it?
Yes, I'm happy to do so. It is indeed in, I think, like a font size 8 or so. Wait a second.
That was the right screen, by the way.
It was the right screen.
It was.
Ah, okay. So that are the references for very fast readers or for screenshotters.
Thank you so much. It was really lovely to hear the multilingualism emphasis, as well as the kind of gamification emphasis. So I'm not sure what to make of it all, but I'm drinking it in. Maybe I'd have a question about the cultural aspect, because in Japan, I think some students maybe have a feeling that they should sweat. And so if it's gamified, there's a certain cultural negotiation that's needed to sell it to them. So I wonder if that's the same in the contexts that you're teaching in, that students need persuading, or it goes without persuading.
The introduction of games into teaching is what you're talking about.
Yeah, and then the culture of learning.
Cultural barriers, the habitus.
Yeah.
Whenever I give a theoretical talk about using games in language teaching, I get all these, but we don't have the time, we have to cover the grammar. I get these things. Wherever I'm doing a workshop that is theory-based, I get this. But when I start the first 10 minutes with a practical example, And afterwards, the participants reflect on, well, okay, I wouldn't have believed that, but I actually learned this now. Or, hey, I was actually engaged in this. When they actually see that it's not spielend, it is actually pretty hard work. I think that is where I get the buy-in. I don't get it by talking, I get it by having people experience that. Because then they see it's worthwhile and it works. And it is not like they already believe it works. Some students do, those who are very active gamers, they know how much they're learning just by having fun. But this is this en passant learning, this informal learning. They are willing to believe that formal learning is also good, but they have a different kind of experience background. And I think it's really the experience that you need, that you can learn by playing, and that it's not like a cop-out, a cheaper option, an easier option that works in teacher education. Okay, Peter Kleins, you have raised your hands.
Is that right? Okay, yes, he does. Yeah, Peter, please.
Great. First, thank you very much. Fascinating stuff all the way through, and the speech just flew by as well. I couldn't believe it was over. Just a couple of comments on You Do It and Melange. One of the things that I've seen where there's any kind of like role playing or something like that is that it's very important, and you mentioned it there as well, that reflection period because sometimes as students are experiencing it, they don't actually have time to process. Like you said, oh, I used only English in Luxembourg, I think you mentioned, and that affected the outcome. Is there any kind of built-in like a reflection questionnaire at the end, or like a discussion time that students can have when they do that?
We have two different things we created. One is the game. The other thing is the teaching material. So of course you could sit down and just play Melange, but the majority of people will be encountering it in a classroom with a teacher who uses like pre-activities and post-activities. Some of them will be form focused, some will be meaning focused, some will be awareness raising. And there's basically a teacher handbook and a whole book of material that can be used for both of these. Perfect,
that's great. So yeah, I misunderstood. There were in the past when I was learning languages, there was a vaguely similar and much simpler kind of adventure going around the streets of Paris. But then there's no reflection time and no guided learning. So that's great to know. Thank you very much.
Any cool projects? Have you gone into your classroom dressed as a fairy? I know, Judith, I know that you have.
No, my colleague. I had a colleague once as a fairy, and yeah, I bought, toys and stuff for her, and once I think as a unicorn. But I was a professor at a visiting school, and I was an agent for the Man in Black. And what I like most, and I really love telling the story, when I taught my breakout games and gamification seminar for the first time, I knew it would be a very hard, intense seminar where people would really have to commit to that seminar to take anything out of it. So I said application only in a mysterious manner. You could not apply via email, you could not apply via the online system. You had to do a gamified application to get in. And I did have people who actually dressed up as delivery people to give me a box anonymously that I had to sign, which contained a breakout game. I did have people who recruited friends who came into my office hours screaming at me and throwing an application for the seminar at me, running away afterwards. So there is dress up happening in my seminars, though it's not always by me, it's sometimes either by my students or by collaborators.
Oh, I love it.
It was actually a little bit frightening in the situation itself, but the student got a spot because it was so well done. Okay, Alan Head, has COVID changed something?
Where did you just get that? Was that a private message?
No, it's in the
on the
chat.
chat, James.
Okay, I don't see it, but cool.
Do you think COVID has changed the habitus? Like because they've become so much acclimatized now to certain things anyway.
In the original study by Kommer, he did find that people said, yeah, of course I'm using technology for kind of, I have to use Word, I have to use the internet, I have to use email. That is kind of part of my job. But that did not extend to necessarily to the more playful sides. So people will happily endorse email and learning management systems and word processors and digital PDFs, but it doesn't mean that they are open to games, to social media, and to other things like, you know, fan fiction practices or the less formal kinds of things that do not feel like office products. But I would be very interested in seeing whether there are studies on whether this has changed. That would be quite interesting to see.
Oh, there's a question. I'll read it out. Thanks for the awesome presentation. And how do you think the open-mindedness and flexibility that develops during a multilingual education affects students' academic success in different subjects? Interesting.
Okay. Education. First off, I believe that everybody deserves to be seen as a full person, to be seen as a human being with all the different facets they have and that they bring to the classroom. And having a classroom that is open to more than one language, and not only to the modern foreign languages taught at the school, not only to German, French, Spanish, Chinese, Japanese, but to those languages students actually bring into the classroom, where these are seen as valuable, where these are seen as important, can feel more, you know, fully seen, fully respected as a person who doesn't have to hide part of who they are in order to be accepted by the, you know, this middle class monolingual habitus kind of educational system that we have here. So I do believe that this definitely helps. Not feeling bad about who you are and not hiding who you are is always going to profit students. I'm not sure. I know that there are studies on open-mindedness and on how multilingual education impacts that, but I'm not up to, you know, the current research on that. So I do not want to comment too much because I would, you know, there might be a little bit of hot air in that rather than a data-based response.
Thank you. Have you read the book, The Pedagogy of Multiliteracies, Rewriting Goldilocks? It's a book based in Canada, where a teacher was taking the same kind of approach, allowing students to use their native or mother tongue, should I say, to remix the story of Goldilocks, and it very much takes on that particular angle of progressive education, where she used it's by Lotherington, and she used the pedagogy of multiliteracies to look at that. So it might be something interesting for others that are interested in a multilingual approach as well. We're coming up to about 5 minutes left. We still haven't had any other cool stories from the participants. What gameful, playful, ludic approaches have you done to your own teaching that you're particularly proud of? Or maybe you've not used games at all. Maybe you could talk about why you perhaps haven't. I mean, Judith talked about some of the hurdles of habitus being, you know, well, are teacher trainers actually playing games or not? I think one thing that Judith didn't touch on quite as much in the talk was the logistic barriers to bringing particularly digital games into the classroom. Maybe some of you have wanted to play Fortnite with your students and thought, well, how the hell am I going to get Fortnite into my class? Has anyone come across that kind of situation, or have a question about how can I bring games into the classroom other than the idea of not knowing about games, ludic literacy skill? Peter.
Yeah, so cut me off as well if I'm talking too much. When COVID first broke out, I was in junior high school, and the schools were all closed here in Japan. And I started developing an app that the students could download and use while the school was closed. But then the school viewed the approach as not all students would have access to that, so we can't use it at all. In the aftermath of that, as COVID developed anyway, a lot of schools in my prefecture, the prefecture office decided to pay for each student to have a tablet that they could use in class and to always bring home. So I think that the awful effects of COVID have had some positive impacts towards accepting technology in the classrooms in Japan as well.
We have plenty of these logistic problems as well. And one of the things is we actually bought, a big box of iPads where we can install all the apps that we definitely want to take into our university seminars. And then I finally had students who said, that is fantastic. By the way, I am teaching part-time at schools. I want to do exactly that with my students now at school. And realized, yes, but we don't have the equipment. And what we did then is we figured out how to loan these iPads to students who are going to their schools where they have a part-time job. Because once the headmaster, the headmistress sees, hey, kids are learning, this is good. You can find money, but you need to see it is useful and can be implemented. And there will be people who will champion that. And we hope that by having university students who already work at schools, basically take the ideas, but also loaning the hardware, we can make this a little bit better. But of course, that is an individual solution, and it will not, if you ever go to a German school, no Wi-Fi, no electrical outlets, and there might be a cell phones forbidden sign at when you enter the school. But it is changing. It's just that the individual teacher, who is the first who wants to do something, suddenly realizes, no electricity, no Wi-Fi, we have running water, and that's it. We'll have a very, very uphill battle, but it's getting better.
What about low-tech solutions? Low-tech solutions,
yeah.
Paper games, play, like you mentioned. There are a lot of alternatives that Judith mentioned in their talk. The idea of escape rooms that could be either created by teacher or the students. I think there's a bit of a digital fetishism we're at a call conference, so I guess that's going to be, something. What am I trying to say? But yeah, it doesn't have to be digital all the time. That's perhaps a shortcut to doing playful things in the class. And I think that Judith introduced multiple examples of that in the talk today.
Kelly Donovan?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of give a perspective on where I am. So China recently passed a whole bunch of gaming laws that came into effect right when I started teaching a gaming course. So limiting the minors to 3 hours a week of gameplay on the weekends. So it kind of changed drastically how I had to think about when I was assigning homework, because they had to be analyzing these games, but they couldn't access them unless it was Friday, Saturday, and Sunday between like 8 to 10 p.m. And then the whole servers were crashing because every minor in China was trying to get on at the same time. So there's definitely even like national level laws, not even just curriculum restrictions that are in play here, which then kind of led to solutions of similar to what you said, like the university being like, okay, well, we're going to set up a gaming lab for you, and trying to like have me provide my own games and also analog games. So board games are really expensive, especially if you want an English copy for them to be using. So I schlep all of these board games into the classroom and things like that. But it is the struggle for trying to get the value of this beyond, you know, our minds, and this group is just a constant struggle, I think.
Yeah, that makes it double hard. One of the things that makes it easier for me is that the Standing Committee of Ministers of Education of the Länder of the Federal Republic of Germany, very long word, but it's basically all states collaborating together on the level of education, passed a strategy paper that says that there are like 100 different competencies we need to enable pupils to develop, from understanding algorithms to understanding netiquette, to presenting using multimedia, to evaluating different media products. So whatever the subject is, we can say, the KMK said, you need to cover that. And this makes it so much easier if you have a kind of policy support in your back.
Absolutely. Right, unfortunately, that is the allotted time that we have for Judith's talk. I'm sure Judith will be available over the weekend. We have a Zoom lounge set up, which you can access via the Edzilla site. We also have the Gather Town, which is open the whole weekend, where people can browse around in there. Just one more time, everyone give it up for Judith for her incredible talk, trying to merge the concepts of call, games, and multilingual education at both the teaching level and the learning level. So yeah, it was a very broad talk, and I think we all learned a lot from it. So one more time, thank you very much, Judith.
Thank you for listening to what I had to say.
If the audience wanted to show their faces, it'd be nice to share a smile. Yeah, it just feels that like extra level of, you know, it bridges the different distance a little bit. Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of us will be presenting over the weekend. If you're not sure what you want to see yet, maybe